Hello, everybody out there in radio land. It is once again that time of the week where we come onto your radio dial and we talk about what is going on, what is going down. We dig underneath the headlines. We tell you about the stuff that the mainstream media is not telling you about, or conversely, we talk about what kind of BS them and the corporate propaganda is trying to shove down all y'all's throats. So it is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Now, as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may happen to be. Want to wish everybody happy holidays. If you were celebrating, Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or Ramadan or Festivus or what have you, I hope you had an excellent and lovely holiday with your family or by yourself. Maybe you're just cuddling up underneath some blankets and watching Netflix. That is perfectly acceptable as well.
Nah, it's the Christmas Story, Die Hard.
Yeah.
It's the Christmas Story, Die Hard, The Grinch, and Miracle on 31st Street.
Yep, that's right.
And also Home Alone, because Home Alone, Home Alone is a Christmas story, and
that's important.
And I do support that Christmas story. I don't think it's better than It's a Wonderful Life, but hey,
Yeah, Wonderful Life is it?
It's a Wonderful Life is a classic.
Also, it's got investigated. They investigated Frank Capra for being a communist.
Hey,
what is this?
Hey, but you had the regular dude tell a banker, "Hey, you can go shove it."
Yeah.
Like,
who doesn't love a story like that?
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, yo, you're being corrupt. You're hurting my town. You can go shove it. Like,
right.
you know.
Oh, hold on just a second. I want to make sure that I hit the recording button on the computer.
Oh snap! So while you're doing that, so yo, this is our last. Wild Lawrence has appeared. Everybody, this is our last episode before the last episode of the year. So we would do some yearly wrap ups of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We are as of today. We are in the midst, we are at the beginnings of a great crash. We have wealth disparity that's similar to the signs during the Great Depression and right before the Great Depression.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right before the Great Depression, for people who do not know, the richest people in the country had 26% of the GDP of the country, of the wealth in the country.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, the richest people in our country has 26% of the wealth in our country. So it gets the wealth disparity, the wealth gap is about the same as when the crash started in the Great Depression. So we are on the precipice of that. If you've been watching the markets, the Dow Jones Industrial had its worst December since the Great Depression. So yeah, that should tell you all you need to know about 2018 when it comes to economics. Because we had this bull market, now we're having a bear market. And the last year, at the beginning of the year, in late into 2016, you heard the tax cuts is going to help everybody. Everybody's going to make more money. It's going to be a boom to our economy. And when you artificially inflate the market, you're going to have a crash, which they did. The average American got a 2 cents extra on their paycheck because of the tax cuts.
Yep.
The average millionaire got over 1.2 million.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep.
So it's upsetting because we've seen this story play out in our country before. It happened during the Roaring '20s, and then we had the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Reagan. Cut and deregulate. You artificially inflate the market by stock buybacks. Had a great crash. Clinton gets rid of Glass-Steagall. Bush deregulates, inflates the market, and then you have the Great Recession that happens because of what Bush did.
That's right.
So we're in the exact same boat. If history is going to repeat itself, to have a crash within the next 1 to 2 years.
Almost seems to me it's like we're in the middle of a natural experiment, because with the Great Depression, it's like, okay, you saw what could happen when you had these kind of progressive reformist social policies that were forwarded by the big labor unions, the socialist and communist parties at the time, also all putting pressure on the FDR administration to pass these social reforms that really helped lift us out of the Great Depression. The Great Recession is it's like a perfect opposite example. Like here's a very similar situation, only this time we are not going to do that. We're going to instead funnel all of that money to the top 1% of society, bail out all the banks instead of bailing out working class people through workers programs and federal benefits, Social Security, etc. We are definitely heading for a crash. And if history is any teacher, I feel like it's going to teach us some very tough lessons.
I mean, the thing, just to jump off of what you just said, people forget. People are mad at people like AOC and Bernie Sanders saying that they're too far left. Let me remind you that FDR was more left than they were. And FDR was elected 4 times. FDR died in office. And you want to talk about leftist ideas. The second Bill of Rights that FDR wanted. Every American has a right to a job, adequate wage and decent living, and a decent house, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accidents, age, and in unemployment, and a good education. Mm-hmm. That was FDR back in 1944.
Yep, that's right. He came out with the Workers' Bill of Rights.
The second Bill of Rights, the Workers' Bill of Rights, and that was 74 years ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, here's the thing. The thing that makes me angry about there are good things that we should be celebrating. 2018 election, we had the Justice Democrats and brand new Congress, our revolution people who are in the House of Representatives. You have more people signing on to things like Medicare for all, a Green New Deal. Green New Deal is actually in the public sphere and being talked about. And actually, a new study just came out that Republicans like a Green New Deal. Mm-hmm. So overwhelming majority, over 60% of Republicans like a Green New Deal.
That's right.
So I mean, those are things that we have to also celebrate. But at the same time, we're here to give you facts. And as of right now, within the next 2 to 5 years, in my opinion, not my opinion, if history has any indicator, another crash, another boom bust cycle is happening, and we're in the middle of that.
Yep. And, I think, we'll be poised, and when I say we, I mean the collective left, to really kind of seize that situation for ourselves in the way that Trump was able to really, seize on the economic... I don't want to say economic anxiety because there's a lot of racism in there, but
no, there's economic anxiety.
There was,
but there. I mean, again, two things can be true at the same time. It can be both.
Yeah, and okay, so where I was going with that is, I think we will be in a much better position to season it, and I would say, no matter what your stance is, how radical you are necessarily. I think it is a huge step forward to have people like Alexandria and Rashida Tlaib to have the platforms that they do. Because I get it. They may not be the exact kind of radical socialist that you are or you would like them to be, but again, it's kind of like Bernard. He's bringing these ideas back into public discourse in a way that, frankly, let's not forget. It's been decades since people have openly said the S word, not only through kind of like the machinations of the Powell memo and, the kind of right-wing counter-revolution spearheaded by Reagan and really going on ever since. Not to mention, Bill Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Council in the 80s dragging the Democratic Party much further to the right. It is a good time to be an American socialist. I mean, it's also just bad times in general, but...
I mean, there's a lot of... Yeah. I mean, unless you're someone like Candace Owens who believes that Jeff Bezos and George Soros is trying to push socialism so that people... No. This is...
Because wealthy oligarchs are trying to push socialism.
No. Doug, okay, so... because I was watching this the other day and I was going to send it to you. Candace Owens went on Russell Brand's show, right? Yeah. She literally said that Jeff Bezos and George Soros are pushing socialism because they don't want other people to be rich capitalists like they are. I literally was like, what?
Man, I'm pretty sure capitalism as it works now does that pretty well for them. I don't think they need to look to a different economic system.
I was so. That's the last time I'm gonna really speak on her. But my God, when I tell you that was so stupid that even Russell Brand was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like,
you're out of your mind.
In his British accent, he was like, "Have you lost your mind?" Like, seriously. But anyway. So let's get to some meat and potatoes of stuff that we wanted to talk about.
So again, let's reel it back to the local. I feel like I wish I could. I don't know if I can play like Star Trek sound bites. I don't know if that will do something with our whole weird copyright rules. But this is a little segment I want to call Damage Report.
Damage Report?
Damage Report.
Yeah.
This is for those of you who've been following the show, you know that Michigan has been going through a particularly despicable lame duck session, much as our comrades over in Wisconsin have, where the Michigan Senate and House have just been both barrels gunning for not only the Democratic elected politicians, but also several really important progressive policy planks. So this is an article I'm going to be reading a little bit from, and it's very helpful if you want a kind of in-depth reporting on how this all played out. But it's that's a wrap. What bills passed died in Michigan lame duck session. This is from Bridge, Michigan, and this was published on December 21st. So let's talk about the bills that passed. The neutered minimum wage paid sick leave passed. That was signed by Tricky Rick. It's going to raise the minimum wage to $12 from $9.24 by 2030. And require some employers to offer sick leave. The bills are far different than legislation that Snyder signed this summer that will raise the minimum wage to $12 by 2022 and required sick leave from far more employers by exempting companies with less than 50 workers. I also want to add that the ballot proposal, as it was originally written, would have also made sure that the minimum wage tracked with inflation. And that cannot be underscored enough. Because, that's when we talk about minimum wage and our struggles, fight for 15, et cetera, that's really what it all boils down to, is the minimum wage is not tracked with inflation. So people have less and less money each year to purchase the same goods, which are becoming more and more expensive. Just a good example. If minimum wage had tracked with inflation from the late 60s, early 70s, minimum wage would currently be about $22 an hour.
I mean, if we're going to tie, I mean, yeah, if we're going to tie, as you said, but at the same time, what people don't realize when during the 1960s, the average American had a manufacturing job. In manufacturing, the average manufacturing job could sustain a person getting a house, getting and have a decent standard of living. The average job in America is a service industry job, which is like working at Walmart, because Walmart is America's biggest employer right now. Walmart, Amazon, McDonald's, those type of jobs, and they don't pay a living wage. No, and that's why you see Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders. Also, shout out to them, because they were going off this year about how Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders and a ragtag group of other progressive Democrats and progressive groups forced Amazon to raise the living wage of their average employee. They're also forcing Walmart to raise the wage of their average employee. They went after Disney. They went after the airline industry. They're also going after McDonald's. Like people talk about having a progressive policy. Bernie lost 2016 and continued to still push his policy, and it's been working.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of how to use your elevated kind of national, I'd say like platform or fame, or I guess both.
That's how you use the bully pulpit, man.
You leverage to put public pressure on big entities, corporations, in a way I really haven't seen any other politicians do in recent memory. I don't know if that's just a factor of how popular he is with the general American public. But
I mean, Elizabeth Warren is trying to make Big Pharma, is trying to put her boot on the neck of Big Pharma, and she's pushing for a Stop Corruption Act, which is a Drain the Swamp type act.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that a few months ago.
Which is great policy. The name of it I cannot remember, because the name of the actual bill sucks. But it should be named. In Kyle Galinsky from Secular Talk framed this perfectly. Name the bill the Drain the Swamp bill, and have Republicans vote against it.
Hey, that's like,
and have Donald Trump vote against it. A Drain the Swamp bill that basically says if you worked in Congress or if you worked in the Senate, you can't then become a lobbyist for the industries that you were making rules for. Like you can't if you take donations from these industries, then you cannot make legislation on said industries.
Oh, and we're going to be talking about the Trump administration a little bit later in the program too. But that is a really good point. And you've seen even Bernard doing stuff like that with the Stop Bezos and the Stop Walmart Act, the cheeky acronyms.
But I mean, there are people who are pushing dope policy. Kamala Harris is pushing dope policy about the almost universal income. Her bill is basically universal basic income. If you are working, you'll get an extra tax break and incentive like monthly if you're working from the government. And it's like, yeah, it makes sense. I was like, I absolutely love that. I think that is an awesome bill. It should just be universal basic income, because then you're. I would rather have it just be UBI, but having people working also receive this income monthly, and they're no matter what the job is, it's awesome. It's fantastic. You're encouraging people to get out and work who can get out and work. So that's great policy. At the same time, you don't see Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Christian Gillibrand and even Elizabeth Warren out there doing town halls like Bernie has been doing and actually forcing these companies to bend the knee.
Yeah, and I think it's really
Ro Khanna and Bernie is.
I really like that you brought up like Kamala Harris in particular, because that brought up a point that I really wanted to bring home, particularly in the frame of these Senate bills passing here in Michigan, and it's that don't rely on an elected official or a politician to go in there and be your hero. Any change that we've ever gotten, and this includes making like these kind of centrist corporate shill law and order types like Kamala Harris shift to the left on policy, that was because of public attention and public pressure. And the same goes through like bills like this. We got to start in lieu of this ballot initiative, which would have been very helpful for the working people of Michigan. We're going to have to organize the hell out of the working class here in this state and, target these corporations who are being the most exploitative. And, there's a lot of despair these days, but, another lesson you should learn from history, you make enough noise, you put enough public pressure, you can get stuff done. My favorite go-to example for that is, remember some of the most kind of progressive, kind of left institutions in our modern federal government were created under the Nixon administration. Nixon created the EPA, and that wasn't because he was a tree hugger. It's because all the tree huggers was outside the White House with their pitchforks, being like, "You created that EPA."
Because Ralph Nader was forcing him to do something about the environment in our country that was literally killing people. That was Ralph Nader that was pushing that stuff. And other leftists as well. And also, we cannot, what we have to do, and I see this on the left all the time, we cannot check out the system because it did not go our way particularly. You cannot say, I don't want to participate because the person that you like did not win. You cannot say, I don't want to participate because the system is designed to screw us over anyway. No. We have to participate. We have to get in the game. We have to put some skin in the game. The reason why is because regardless if you are involved or not, the decisions that are made will still affect you. So you might as well be at the table talking about the issues and forcing them to address what you're bringing up. Yeah. Because when you're doing that, now you are holding people accountable. Now you actually are not just walking the walk, you're talking the talk. You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing that it's this year's made me want to be much more of an activist than just sharing stuff on my news feed. But this year really made me be like, all right, I'm really gonna step up and do more stuff now because we have to be much more active. Yeah, and things true. Things like the lame duck stuff that was going on, trying to strip Gretchen Whitmer and the Democrats of power, passing that very horrible bill. Like in that bill, they were trying to say you need to tell your employer when you're going to take sick time off before you get sick. Like it was the way it was worded. It was like, if I'm sick and I need to take sick time off, your employer can be like, well, you didn't tell me ahead of time, so you need to come into work. How was I supposed to know I was going to get sick? Yeah. Seriously, really. Like what? It's not just, and that's the other thing. It's not just Michigan. It's also Wisconsin, and it's also Scott Walker and a lot of the numbnut stuff that those Republicans are doing.
Before you dive too deep in that, I know you mentioned the environment, and I wanted to talk about the next bill that passed. Line 5 tunnel, the House Bill 1197. It creates an authority to oversee a proposed tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac to house those petroleum pipelines. It's going to cost $500 million to build over the next decade. And the whole line on that is like, oh, it's a tunnel. It's a safe compromise. It balances environmental concerns with commerce. Now, as you know, one of our big motivating factors in the election was Line 5. One, we got to get fossil fuel infrastructure out of the straits. We need, keep it in the ground in general, but in particular, this Line 5 pipeline, which goes under the Straits of Mackinac, which is literally like one of the worst places in the world you could put an oil pipeline. If there was a rupture, particularly in the wintertime, there would be very little that they could actually do about it, and it would leak and more or less destroy one of the Earth's largest sources of fresh water.
It's not a if, it's a when.
Yeah.
Let's not forget over Thanksgiving. Yeah. Let's not forget over Thanksgiving. Yeah. We talked about the Dakota Access Pipeline all the time. Over Thanksgiving, the oil pipeline leaked. It leaked 3 times before 2007, before 2018, and it leaked again. Was barely reported, and it's like, come on, y'all.
But Lawrence, there's a tunnel. They're slapping a condom on it. It'll be safe.
Like the thing that pisses me off is that I want the people who say that these things are great for the environment. I want those CEOs and those people who are pushing for those agenda to go to the place where the water is tainted by oil ruptures, by oil pipelines, and drink that water. I want them to bathe their kids in that water. Yeah. I want them to cook their food in that water.
Yep.
And I want them to see how I basically want. If I could, I would pull a Michael Moore, what he did in Fahrenheit 11.9, and take a bunch of Flint water and go water their grass and house with it, like he did Rick Snyder. It was amazing. Yeah. Oh my God!
I still need to see.
Oh my God, that movie was so amazing. Yeah. And him watering Rick Snyder's lawn with Flint water was absolutely outstanding. Oh God, it was amazing.
All right, so I'm gonna go through the rest of this list real quick here. Well, not real quick. I want to talk about a few of these, but we got the House Bill 4205. That will make it harder for state agencies to adopt regulations that are stricter than the federal government. So in this particular context, what that would mean is we wouldn't be able to have environmental regulations any stricter than the Trump administration, which, God, that would be awful. The kind of any kind of light or good news, potential good news is Snyder did veto a similar bill in 2011. Of course, a lot of things have changed in the last 7 years, so we'll see. But that's on his bill. It's passed. He's got to either sign it or veto it. There's the House Bill 6595 we talked about on the show, which would really hamstring the ability for people to do ballot initiatives. And here's a couple things it would do. It would require voter signatures come from at least half of the state's 14 congressional districts. Require no more than 15% of all signatures come from any single congressional district, which is hard for a lot. Most of your signatures will come from a lot of urban knocking door to door. They also say, and I believe this is also part of the bill, where basically a provision, if you have a false signature on your page, then the state has the authority to throw out all of that signatures from that petitioner, which as somebody who has petitioned before, it's nearly impossible to get a sheet that has no mistakes on it. It's just a ridiculous kind of constraint to put on it. So this would make it virtually impossible to do ballot initiatives.
And that passed as well.
Yeah, that passed as well. That is on Rick Snyder's desk. I don't know if we should just go through these and be like, what are the odds you think he'll sign it or veto it?
No, we should definitely do that. Because, God, that right there, because I had a conversation over the weekend, and they was talking about the government shutdown, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this is I was talking about ballot initiatives, and and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that when the government shuts down, Congress pay should be shut down as well. It's insane that their pay is not tied to that.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
Yeah. So I was like, yo, since as the voters, we are the bosses of our representatives, why don't we make a ballot initiative to have not only put that into law statewide, but let's have a ballot initiative to say the average salary of a congressperson is the state's minimum wage. Those are ballot initiatives that you could put on the ballot that we could fight for, that would aggressively make the state Congress and local politicians act right.
Yeah, no,
and
really.
Absolutely, because if their income is tied to the state's minimum wage, if their income is tied to or when the government shuts down, their pay is shut down as well. But that what you just said would absolutely destroy that.
Yeah,
it destroys those ideas.
And you know what? Like, one of the great things about, like, you know, that was really like the big saving grace of the election. Like, I was really proud to be in a Michigander in that election because, you know, we legalized weed. We knocked out gerrymandering. We passed this really great Voting Rights Expansion Act, and all of those happened through ballot initiatives. And you know what I think is really troubling about this? I think, like, the Republican legislature in Michigan, Republican-controlled legislature in Michigan, I think there's a recognition that there is a great bipartisan support for a lot of these kind of citizens democratic reforms. Like, when you actually make it a decision of the voter, the actual public opinion of people in Michigan is a lot more progressive when you don't have to vote within the constraints of the two-party system. Think of how many Republicans and conservatives voted for legalizing weed, for ending gerrymandering, for expanding voting rights. And, let's be
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. And let's be very clear about that, too, is like, Republican Congress people will do everything they can to make it harder to vote. But when you talk to an actual, like, rank-and-file conservative person, they're all about, like, let's make it easier to vote. Why not? They might tell you some things about, like, dead immigrants voting or something, but...
No. I mean, like, if you care about democracy and you say that you want to really have a battle of ideas in the marketplace of... in the free thought marketplace of ideas, then that part of the legislation that passed... that should infuriate you. That should absolutely infuriate you, because now you're taking away the right of the people to fight for issues that they support. And you're taking away free speech and freedom from Americans. Yeah. That should anger everyone.
Also sitting on Rick's desk for him to either veto or sign. It's the bill that would defang Dana Nessel, or not necessarily defang her, but really hamstring her. The idea is basically it allows the legislature to intervene in lawsuits involving state law. So if our state attorney general is filing a lawsuit against, say, Nestle or Enbridge, then the state legislature could intervene and be like, no, actually, we like those corporate looters, so we're going to fight you on that. The dark money bill is also sitting on his desk, and we had a long discussion on the last show about how that would affect Kalamazoo in particular, shroud the foundation for excellence in a cloud of secrecy. But, what that would do is it bars the state from requiring nonprofit political advocacy groups to disclose donors. So, it basically is a green light for dark money.
It's like, hey, do you want to be corrupt and not have to explain yourself to the American people? We got your back. Yeah, exactly. There was also a Senate bill to kind of weaken Proposal 3, and basically it would make changes to voting regulations in the state, require voters to register at a clerk's home or satellite offices. So basically, it doesn't knock out any of the existing provisions in Prop 3, but it does other things that would make it more difficult to register. It require election clerks to be in their offices on election day, and registration would not be allowed at polling places. And just basically make it harder to register people to vote outside of the Secretary of State. Also, they're this Orwellian stuff. Oh, it clarifies voting rules. It's like, no, it makes it harder to vote. It makes it difficult for people who don't have transportation, who already find it difficult for them to get to their polling places. It makes it difficult for people who are trying to register to vote, and people who had their voting rights taken away, who are now re-registering to vote, to do so. You're making it harder for people to participate in the conversation or in the free market of ideas to talk about the things that they're dealing with. Like it's upsetting. It's absolutely upsetting. It makes literally no logical sense.
Then these last two, I hope Captain Planet is listening because he's going to want to like punch something.
He's going to turn some people into a tree.
Yeah, exactly.
He's going to Don Cheadle some people.
Yeah.
Captain Planet.
Yeah, Captain Planet. This one is it's going to reel in protections for wetlands, Senate Bill 1211. Basically, originally it was a little bit worse. It was would have allowed development on about 550,000 acres of wetlands and 4,200 of Michigan's 11,000 lakes. It underwent some changes. Fewer wetlands would lose protections, but it would still allow for development on a large number of them. And then the toxic waste bill, it would require Michigan regulators to use toxicity values set by the federal government, which critics contend aren't regularly updated. And of course, considering where our federal government is right now, when they're trying to like make asbestos great again, they're probably not too concerned about making sure that we don't have to deal with toxic waste.
I mean, they don't care about toxic waste. Let me remind everybody that it's been a couple years now, and Flint still don't got clean drinking water. So I mean, and we have a PFAS problem in Parchment.
Yep, we sure do.
Yeah.
So all of those bills that we just mentioned, they are not set in stone yet, but they are one governor's signature away from becoming state law. He has until the 31st to sign off on them, and so I guess on our first show of the new year, we can have a proper epitaph for the horrible, disastrous career of Governor Rick Snyder. I don't know. My whole thing is like, he might veto some of them. He might pass all of them. I don't really hold out a lot of hope for a guy who poisoned the city. I know, speaking pragmatically, he is. People like Rick Snyder have these weird thing about their legacy. So he'll probably. I think there might be one or two that he vetoes just to be like, look, I'm pragmatic, but here's a oil pipeline. One tough nerd.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see. I think the most interesting one, the one that's probably most at play here, is the ballot initiative one. Mm-hmm. I could really see him going either way on that. I really think it depends a lot on how many powerful Republicans are really breathing down his neck and putting pressure on him, to how many powerful corporations as well to sign that bill into law. And man, if that passes, that is going to be really tough, because like I said, some of the best things that happened this year happened because of ballot initiatives, and it's probably the most craven thing that I've seen the Michigan Republican legislature do. And as much attention as Wisconsin did, I don't think there was a comparable bill passed in their state legislature. Theirs were mostly tooled to, and we had a few in the Michigan state legislature tooled to restricting like Dana and Gretchen's power, but I know they focused like almost all of their efforts on like, we got to make sure that all these Democrats got elected can't do anything. All right. So anything else to say on that, Lawrence, before we hop on the next topic?
I mean, man, let's start with the thing that we were talking about before. Mm-hmm. Will these things pass? More than likely, yes.
Yep.
We got what, 5 days until the new year, and a week or two after until Gretchen's actually sworn in.
Yep.
So if we're gonna be honest, more than likely, these things will be passed. What does that mean? That means we're gonna have to put a lot of pressure on our senators and our House of Representatives people and our representatives to overturn a lot of this bull.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
To overturn a lot of this bull, because a lot of this cannot stand.
Mm-hmm. Man, I know, actually, I talked to Sean McCann. Hopefully we'll be coming on the show sometime after New Year, and I would definitely like to sit and talk and say, so what you gonna do? Oh, man, this is almost so bad.
Yeah, we got some things to talk about, but at the same time, we also got to get money out of politics, because I can see a lot of Democrats being okay with supporting a lot of that garbage.
Right. And one last thing, I would go and follow the Anisha Nebek camp They are an indigenous pipeline resistance camp styled similar to Standing Rock, and they are up in the Straits right now, and particularly with this law passing, there's definitely going to need to be some more resistance to that pipeline in the future. I do think, eventually we will see it taken down, but again, the Republicans are trying to put as many obstacles in the way as possible. So, I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about, Lawrence, and actually, I don't know, we were talking about a whole lot of different stuff, but a lot of things happened in this last week. The government shut down. We had the troops being pulled out of Syria and Afghanistan, or at least the promise to do so.
Yeah, we have promise of. I want to talk about that because, God, we cannot be reactionary sycophants the same way that Republicans were reactionary sycophants to anything that President Obama did. And the fact that we have Democrats on mainstream media literally fighting for us to stay in these unconstitutional, illegal wars baffles me. Literally baffles me. And we definitely need to talk about that. I do also want to talk about AOC, the Green New Deal, how Democrats kind of killed it.
Oh, yeah,
we do need to talk. We do need to talk about that.
So why don't we start with that one? I think the war conversation is going to have a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you want me to just kind of like start reading from the HuffPo article?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as y'all know, big props to Alexandria for actually putting this in the Washington lexicon.
AOC.
The Green New Deal. Something people have been talking about for several years now, especially if you remember 2016. I think the Green candidate Jill Stein was talking about it a lot. Big hats off to her for bringing it to the Washington lexicon. I think it also brings to the surface just how much resistance there is, especially among the Democratic Party, to any kind of fossil fuel reform. It's something that we should always be mindful of, in this context, is because, Trump administration, people in his EPA, again, making this reference again, there's some straight up like hawkish, greedy Captain Planet villains up there, but the Democrats are the people who, they might not necessarily be supervillains, but they're definitely like the henchmen who don't really don't really care either way. Here's what this all boiled down to. On Thursday, they tapped Kathy Castor, a Democrat from Florida, to head a revived U.S. House panel on climate change. Now, why does that matter? See, Kathy Castor, she's a six-term congresswoman, and she dismissed calls to bar members who accept money from fossil fuel companies from serving on the committee, arguing it would violate free speech rights. Oh my God!
Yeah. Okay. So there's two implications there. One, barring people from. So it says barring people from the Green New Deal or from the group because they take fossil fuel money. She's saying, you're saying that I'm corrupt because I'm taking money from the fossil fuel industry? Yeah. That's exactly what we're saying. We're saying that your interests will be lined with the fossil fuel industry because you've taken money from the fossil fuel industry and then you do things that would benefit them.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is you're claiming, you're literally saying that the establishment Democrats are pro-Citizens United because think about this. Because what was Citizens United and Buckley v. Vallejo? Corporations have free speech rights because they are giving money to they're giving money, and that money is their speech. So you're
they definitely have the right to speak through your elected official, kind of like a sock puppet.
Yeah. So the stance that she's taking when she says that is literally saying, no, I take money from these organizations, but the money that I'm taking from these organizations, she's implying that will not affect her. But the Princeton study and other studies have shown that when politicians take money from multinational corporations, they then do the bidding that would favor multinational corporations. Over 93% of the country knows that money corrupts politics. And the fact that you're arguing for the money to stay in your pocket, to stay in politics, means that you are against the ideas of a Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal would put in policy that would affect the people who's donating to you.
Ding, ding, ding.
So, again, you're not helping your cause as a Democrat, and you're pushing us more into catastrophic climate change.
Well, I mean, I would make the argument that supporting their corporate interests is their cause. But
no. But this is the thing. There's nothing, because later in that argument, she talks about how it's pragmatic, how she likes to take pragmatic steps to dealing with climate change. There's nothing pragmatic about incrementalism when it comes to a catastrophic climate change that will happen to us within the next 11 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's what's really maddening, and especially I assume to millennials like us, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's like, whether it's greed, corruption, or just plain cognitive dissonance, probably a combination of all. Yeah.
Right. All of the above.
It's crazy. You're staring across a table, and what millennials hear when we hear that is oh yeah, well, we're going to make some negotiations with human extinction, and we'll get back to you. It's you can't negotiate with that. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't negotiate with the potential end of the human race. You either do what needs to be done, or we all die. All right.
No. Here's the thing. Let's keep it. I'm gonna keep it 100% real on here. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein. They don't care. Why?
No.
Why? Because
they're old.
Yeah, it's because they're old. It's because they're old. They're not gonna have to deal with it.
Yep.
They're not gonna have to deal with it. But you know who's gonna have to deal with it? Their kids and grandkids.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the rest of us who cannot afford to move.
Yeah, no, seriously. I don't know what the eventual plan is. I guess move to space or
they're
something.
They're gonna try to move to Mars, man.
Yeah, Elon Musk's already getting that done. Right. All right, but it's just it is really just it is so frustrating. It's like one of those one step forward, two steps back type of thing. And especially it's watching the climate situation on the governmental level. It's kind of like, okay, when you're playing Sonic the Hedgehog and he's running out of air, and it's like you hear that music, dun 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 dun. Right now we're at that. Yes, 8 years. Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't think the Congress. I'm a little cynical. I don't know if we're gonna get any of those life-saving bubbles from Congress. I think maybe we're gonna have to put on some yellow vests or something. But
no, we're gonna either that or you're gonna have to get the bubble shield.
Yeah, that bubble shield. Yeah, that's
Sonic
right.
3.
Yeah,
Sonic 3 was my game, man. But anyway, here's the thing. This is the thing that makes me upset. No, the thing that makes me upset, talking about Sonic, this is a whole different tangent. Yeah. Tails was a genius, and I'm like,
yeah,
Tails, you're a genius, but you can't build a helmet or something that for Sonic to go underwater. You can't do. But anyway. Yeah. But this is my point. The issue that I have with Nancy Pelosi, not only putting her as a part of the chair, the group, being part of the group, but that also shows you where Nancy Pelosi is on how she feels about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Justice Democrats. Because why would you put someone in a committee where the rest of the people are not taking fossil fuel money. You would only do that, and you would only put them in a leadership position to do so if you want to derail what they're doing.
That's right. Yep. Exactly.
And you don't also, and you're doing that because you don't support it. Because Nancy's not supporting the Green New Deal. She hasn't come out once for it. Nancy doesn't support Medicare for all. Because she calls it, she says she said it was unfeasible. Like Nancy Pelosi and the other people who are in leadership, they don't like progressive, non-corrupt candidates, and how they are backstabbing the actual progressive candidates show you exactly what they're exactly where they are.
Yeah, and I mean, keep in mind, like we're coming up into 2020. And we're going to be seeing a lot of this stuff again. I mean, they've literally had like these think tank weekends where like all of the rich establishment Democrats like get together in the mountains or something and talk about how to crush the progressive insurgency. And it's frustrating to watch from the sidelines because, as somebody who's a grassroots activist, you understand what they haven't really, gotten into their heads yet, that it's not conservative versus liberal, it's not Democrat versus Republican. We're at one of those points in human history where it is reactionaries versus revolutionaries. It is leftists versus fascists. We're at a very similar historical point that we were like leading up to World War II. And it's just so frustrating watching people in our own government not understand the gravity of what's going on geopolitically. When I making $10 an hour wiping butts, I get it. It's like, oh man, it's like we're at the precipice of like a global fascism and the climate crisis, and the people we got in charge are a bunch of clowns who either don't care or are just don't care enough to learn, man. Yep.
Yeah, that's really it, man. Like, there's more to talk about. There's a lot more to talk about on this topic, but I know we're coming up on a break, and we got a whole another hour to talk about stuff.
Let's make sure. How about next we talk about these de-escalations going on in Syria and Afghanistan.
Let's take a break first before we dive in.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's take a break before we dive in.
Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
You're listening to Wider Kalamazoo.
Oh, great Scott!
89.1 FM, Radio Evolution.
This is an open slot in the Wider Clock and could be filled with an underwriting announcement for your local Kalamazoo business. For more information, please visit widerfm.org and head to the contact page.
Stay tuned for Wider's weekly RSO Spotlight
on WIDR Kalamazoo.
Hi, my name is Maggie, and I'm the president for the German Club. German Club is an RSO on Western Michigan's campus that celebrates German culture through events and offers extra credit opportunities for German language students. We meet at Brown Hall. To find out more about the German Club, you can visit our Facebook at German Club at WMU.
This has been our weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo.
For more information on how to spotlight your RSO, head to WIDRFM.org.
Hello, y'all. We're back. Big props to that is Armut and Fizzgig Henson we are using for the background noise. This is recorded about 6 years ago over at the Black Lodge. So now let's go ahead and hop into this has probably been one of the most controversial things coming out of the holiday. I'd say besides the government shutdown, but we've got some stuff to talk about when it comes to these troop withdrawals, and I think it's like kind of a 2 or 3 really important points that we want to bring up, especially like a lot of our show is being like a media watchdog, and oh god, the media. Oh yeah. It's like, do you want to start with this?
Okay, here's the thing. We've had troops that were supposed to get scaled down before. In Syria, what's not being told is that we occupy 1/3 of that country. That us bombing Syria in Damascus because of alleged chemical weapons that Bashar al-Assad did was illegal under international law. Us attacking Syria was under international law, so us pulling troops out of there is a good thing. Now, a broken clock can be... what's that idiom? A broken clock can
be right twice a day.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, overwhelming majority of the time, Trump, 45... is Joffrey from the Game of Thrones. We call him Joffrey. We call him President Joffrey all the time. But you could do one right thing, and that one right thing is getting our troops out of Syria and also getting our troops out of Afghanistan. I'm not hopeful with Afghanistan. During the Bush administration, he scaled back troops in Afghanistan and then repped them back up. Mm-hmm. During the President Obama administration, he scaled troops back down and then revved them back up. This is just more of the same.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So instead of just scaling them down to 7,000 troops, how about we scale them down to 0 because they shouldn't be there in the first place? No. Please let me remind you that the overwhelming majority of the people that attacked us on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. 15 what was it? 15 out of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, man.
Yeah. Yep. So this is the issue. One, no one can tell you what victory looks like in these conflicts, and we are in 8 of them as of right now. 8. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. You have us helping Syria with Yemen. We're literally, and this has been reported, in Syria, we have CIA-backed rebels and Pentagon-backed rebels fighting each other. Mm-hmm. We are literally funding both sides of the war. Yep. And also what's been reported is that the people that were the rebels that were fighting Bashar al-Assad in Syria was ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. We are literally funding terrorists
Syria
that we were supposed to be fighting.
The more I think about Syria, it's like a culmination of just like a century of U.S. imperialism mixed with just rank incompetence. Like it's like the U.S. hegemony being run by the Three Stooges. It's like
dog. It's like what's that one British show, the Ronnie Python and the Holy Grail?
Oh yeah,
it's like that. Yeah. It's like if that was being written by if that story was being written by the people who made the Python and the Holy Grail. The thing that makes
I'm arming these rebels. No, I'm arming these rebels.
Right? Like,
oh dear.
Right. Right. But that's the thing that makes it upsetting is that the level of context, and also to forget about Afghanistan, we've been there for 17 years.
17 years. Yeah.
We've been there for 17 years. The argument that you will hear is that we'll demoralize the morale of the Afghanistan troops if we leave. We've been there for 17 years. Yeah. If their morale's not up, I don't know what to tell you. Also, forget about Afghanistan. We were sent there because of weapons of mass destruction, which was a lie. We were sent there because Saddam Hussein
or Iraq.
No. But we invaded Iraq and then Afghanistan because we were fighting terrorism like Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups. Afghanistan is now controlled 40% by terrorists. Al Qaeda.
I think it's worth reminding our listeners too. The Taliban.
The
Taliban surrendered. And they've actually tried to surrender several times throughout the conflict.
4 different times the Taliban has surrendered to the United States.
And each time they were either rejected, not listened to. So we're at a place where they gave up trying to surrender and were able to consolidate their forces. So now they're actually stronger than they were in 2001. Not only that, their opium production has skyrocketed.
They also control 40% of the country.
Yep.
So before we got there, they didn't. As of right now, as we're talking, they control 40% of the country. We increased the number of terrorists, not decreased.
Yeah.
Even though we took out Osama bin Laden, we took out the other guy who we said we need to get him because he was a dictator. We've always moved the goalpost on what victory looks like, and then we give our military blank checks to go and do whatever they want in these conflicts. That's the problem. We are not fixing. We're not fixing issues. We're making it worse. And the fact that we launched an offensive war on a country that did not attack us should be the one thing that we scream about the most.
Yeah, exactly. And
so if mission was accomplished, when President Bush said it, then why are we still there?
Ding, 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 ding. And like something else I wanted to mention too is there are a lot of economic reasons that we are there. There's Afghanistan is kind of a gold mine for rare earth minerals, the kind of things that go into your smartphones. That's been brought up several times. Is like we've noticed, and especially when the Trump administration first got elected, they were talking about that quite openly. Like it would be as if Dick Cheney was just like, we gotta get there for all that oil, back in 04, 03.
And the other thing is that it's not just Afghanistan; it's also countries in Africa that they're literally ripping the minerals out of the ground.
There's a great book, by the way. You also read it. Tomorrow's Battlefield talks about military presence in Africa. Before I get too sidetracked, so we're bringing up all this context because the way that the mainstream media is discussing it, it's crazy. It is like a funhouse mirror thing. It's like and granted, I don't watch TV too much, but I watch it enough to be like, they're talking about how like. He's Putin's puppet because he's doing this. Rachel Maddow was really putting on her tinfoil hat talking about this stuff. The same woman, by the way, Rachel Maddow, once wrote a book about the necessity of stopping our endless wars in the Middle East. Tune into her show a few nights ago. She's talking about how pulling our troops out of Syria and Afghanistan is a disastrous foreign policy move. And
she literally did like a 2-hour special or like a special about us being lied into Iraq and Afghanistan. She actually broke down what the lies were. This is before she became a corporate shill.
She's making that MSNBC money.
No.
I mean, she still was, but
she was on MSNBC at the time, but she wasn't as popular as she is now, and she's not, and she wasn't as news crazy as just moronic.
I'd say like ratings driven. Because I mean, she's a very smart woman, but
she's a Rhodes Scholar.
She's a Rhodes Scholar, but she, I mean, the reason her show has become so batty is because it gets good ratings and that keeps her checks flowing. Let's be real honest here. Yeah.
Like that's the thing that really makes me upset is that there's no substantive conversation about what we're talking about right now on TV. A lot of Democrats that we see on TV argue for us staying in these wars and forgetting the fact that the Democrats should be the pro-peace party. We're supposed to be anti-war. We should be celebrating the fact that we're getting out of these conflicts. Why? Because it's a strain on our budget. We've spent over. It was a study that came out recently. Afghanistan and Iraq, we will have spent $10 trillion. Mm-hmm. We have spent $10 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. Think about that. Medicare for all, in conservative estimates, would cost around $32 trillion. Mm-hmm. Like around. So I mean, not 32, $1 billion, right? It would save us $2 trillion. Mm-hmm. And we've spent more money in offensive wars in countries that did not attack us than actually providing Medicare, universal education, infrastructure, adequate infrastructure spending in our country. But we spent that money to drone and destroy black and brown countries internationally. Yeah.
And, you said the D word. That gets me to my third point. So we talk criticizing the media about just how hawkish everyone is. It's like there's this weird alliance between neoconservative war hawks and people who just hate Trump, everything Trump does. But I think there's also a broader point. I see even a lot of anti-war progressives missing, and it's that we're talking about, okay, we're withdrawing the troops. What about our drones? Our drones are still there. And in fact, there's this great couple of great interviews on Democracy Now! Right after Trump made the Syria announcement, where you had some on-the-ground journalists and kind of experts talking about the fact that the drone strikes and the air support is still going to be happening in these countries. And two things that really comes to mind is, like, it concerns me because while one, I think it is good to bring our troops home, this also kind of reminds me of what happened under the Obama administration, where in the totality, in the final analysis, Barack Obama decided to focus less on troop and soldier deployments and more on drone warfare. Now, I'll never forget this. I was once at a KNOW meeting. There's a Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War, and I asked kind of the room, why is the anti-war movement so stagnant? Where things have only escalated since 2003. 2003 was like, when the Iraq war lead up to the Iraq war. It was at a fever pitch, anti-war organizing. And somebody brought up, there's not as many soldiers coming home in body bags, so it's not at the forefront of a lot of Americans' minds.
It's not. That was actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was actually something that our government asked our mainstream media not to show, not to show as much, because there are still soldiers that are dying, and there are still soldiers that are being killed.
I don't want to downplay that.
But no, we're not downplaying it. Yeah. Our mainstream media is downplaying it because during Vietnam, the reason why Vietnam got so much negative press is because the people could see what the war actually looked like to our men and women. Also, on top of that, the last polling that was on Afghanistan, only 13% of the country still wanted to be in Afghanistan.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Afghanistan war back in 2000, I think it was 2012. That was the last time the study came out. Was polling worse than Vietnam. Mm-hmm. That's like. But again, is that the subject that you hear when you look on mainstream media? Is Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Laura O'Donnell, Chris.
I will actually give Chris Hayes some props for paying. He's been paying more attention and talking about Yemen on his show. Yeah. And of course, that means in the context of mainstream media, that mainstream corporate media, that means he's spending 3 or 4 minutes on it. But
as a 3 or 4 minute segment with no conversation, and then he goes to a commercial break. Yeah. then goes and talks about another topic.
Yeah. We did some bad things over in Yemen, but this is about as much time as my bosses will let me talk about it. Now let's talk about Stormy Daniels.
Let's talk about Trump's new deranged tweet for the next hour, and let me have a panel discussion with a Republican who's going to defend it and a Democrat who's going to talk against it.
But one thing I just really wanted to bring home though is like, it's good to bring troops home. And if you disagree with that, you don't got your head on right. You need to, put aside the Trump derangement syndrome for a second. It is good to de-escalate these wars. But at the same time, I think, like, if you are a genuine anti-war activist or you're against war, as really everyone should be, it's also, you should be a little apprehensive because, we're pulling the troops out. But at the same time, Afghanistan, the collateral damages, according to Air Wars, has gone up significantly even since Trump got in office. And we were complaining when Obama was president. But
just to give context on what you just said, when President Obama was in office, 90% of his drone strikes was hitting civilians. As of 3 months ago. Not 3 months ago. At the beginning of Trump's presidency, he escalated drone strikes over 300%.
Over 300%. Yeah. So if, this is, it makes me so upset and mad because, I think like this is really like, we could get into a discussion a little bit of like why, this is kind of why I describe myself as an internationalist, because I feel like, and nationalism isn't always a bad thing. I think, you look at it, it's kind of, you got to look at the historical context of a situation. A lot of kind of anti-imperialist and capitalist uprisings have been based on like kind of nationalist appeals. Like I'm thinking of like, Burkina Faso or like Vietnam, etc. But American nationalism is really toxic in the sense that, we will focus on our own people being there, the American people being there, but not care about these innocent people who are our bombs. Our tax money is being used to murder these people en masse. And it's not that people actively think like, oh, American lives are more valuable. It's just kind of how you subconsciously think when you grow up in this culture, is that you are taught not to value the lives of those people as much as your fellow Americans. And, that's really toxic. And I'm just so concerned we're going to end up in a situation where, we're going to have Trump. Maybe he's like the peace president because he pulled out all of our actual troops, but we'll still be just like blowing innocent people away from here, from Afghanistan to Yemen to Syria
to Jordan.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. There's two things. One, Trump likes to take credit for things that he does not do. He took credit for North Korea, which had nothing to do with him. You know what? Fine, I'm take that. I have a low bar for just outright nonsense because it seemed like we were going to have a hot war with North Korea for a very long time because Trump was being nuts. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to these foreign policy issues, if it leads to peace, okay, it's good. All right, just if it's leading to peace, that's good. Here's the problem. You have people. There's two things. One, our idiot president did not talk to our allies or talk to the Pentagon or talk to to anyone who actually is a general about what he is saying, about what he wanted to do.
Oh yeah, he made this order by tweet.
Yeah, which is completely dumb and irrational. But at the same time, we've gotten used to dumb and irrational because of 45. Yeah. This is the other issue. When you have Democrats like Howard Dean attacking progressives like Ro Khanna, talking about how Al Qaeda and the Taliban will take over, and that's the reason why we need to stay there. When Howard Dean was against these wars in the first place and actually tried to push President Obama to get out of Afghanistan, we need to remind them that these wars are illegal in the first place, and that these countries, if they could not handle the situation and it's been 17 years, then what we can do is support them by not being involved in the first place, by giving them advice, but not weapons. We need to try something different because it's not working. Maybe we should try peace and negotiations. You know, Jimmy Carter orchestrated a peace deal between Israel and Egypt, which was their biggest competitor at the time, who they were fighting at the time, and he orchestrated peace. He got peace in the Middle East because of having conversations instead of killing people. You know, diplomacy is a word that I think that these people need to understand can still be used in today's day and age. But we need to have an idea or a framework around diplomacy and treating everyone who's involved like actual human beings.
That's right.
We have to have a conscience, people. We have to have a conscience.
We do. We got to be like, let our morals do the talk. Is like, again, it's like, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but it's like that queasy feeling you get. You start thinking about this stuff. It's like, it's like, I do not like that money out of my paycheck being spent to do this stuff. It's gross. So I think we're going to be having an interview actually with the president of the Socialist Rifle Association coming up in a few minutes. But I did want to make sure we got to some other really important stories, kind of like some quick hits. Wanted to give everybody an update on Cyntoia Brown. As you know, she is a young woman who was sentenced to how many? 51 years. Yeah. 51 years in prison for defending herself from a sex trafficker. That's basically. So what people have been doing? People have been hitting up Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam to pressure him, give her clemency. Here's some bad news. He put out, their office put out the list. There's 11 people on the list. Cyntoia Brown's name was not on that list. So, one, and two, we will say, his office has said he is considering it. And he has until the end of the year to actually make his final choices, picks, whatnot. So, again, and I really don't like doing this. It's one of my least favorite calls to action, but it sounds like he can be moved. Why he hasn't already done it yet is beyond me. But, call him up, send him his office an email, be like, hey, be a decent human being and make sure this woman doesn't spend the rest of her life in prison for defending herself, I don't know anything to say about that.
Here's the thing. What you're going to hear, especially when it comes to that story, it's the fact that she was 16 years old and she was being pimped out by her boyfriend. Now, let me remind you that before this case, a 16-year-old in the state of Tennessee could be looked at as a prostitute. After her case, they created a law in Tennessee and a national law saying that 16-year-olds cannot give consent to have sex. Yeah, you want to know why? Because they're still teenagers. Almost cuss. Here's the problem. Under the new law, she should get clemency. Why? Because she was, one, being sex trafficked. Two, she wasn't a prostitute. She was being forced to. And three, she was defending herself. If this was Florida, she would be using stand your ground. And Tennessee is a red state that would be has castle doctrines like that. The problem is that I see is that even with the new law that they have in Tennessee, they're not allowing her the same type of dignity, is because she does not have the representation, plight, or political power as a Harvey Weinstein or a actual rapist, violent rapist, who hasn't served any time in jail. Our current president, Harvey Weinstein, and others who literally violently rape people or sexually assaulted people, and they're not in jail. the problem is, I get that she took somebody's life, but she was being raped.
Yeah.
Being able to defend yourself against an attacker who's sexually assaulting you should be taken into consideration.
Well, I think there's a reason too that, like, you know, Black Lives Matter and media organizations like The Root have really seized on the story.
Yeah,
because there is definitely some a racial aspect to this.
Oh no, it's definitely racist. Yeah. Oh yeah, they are definitely racist. Let's not beat around the bush.
Because think about it, like a white teenager who, you know, did, because like conservatives are always talking about like self-defense. It's okay to murder in self-defense. It's okay to kill somebody if your life is on the line. That's exactly the situation this woman was in, and she got 51 years. And yeah, if you want to tell me it's like, oh, well, it would have been the same. No, it wouldn't. Some like white blonde teenager.
No. We have context for this because the swimmer who raped somebody behind a dumpster got 6 months.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to ruin his life. He's
right. We have context because the dude that literally raped somebody who was a college student, who was a swimmer, got 6 months. Brock Turner got 6 months, and if you're telling me that the women who would have defended themselves against him raping them should be in jail for the rest of their life?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is that the context that we're putting out here? Is that what we're implying? That if you're being sexually assaulted, just take it?
Yeah.
Is that literally? Is either just take it or you can spend the rest of your life in jail if you defend yourself.
So I was just wanting to read this.
What?
So this is another real downer one, but I did want to let people know that this happened. And it's just like, you know what? I read this headline. I'm like, this is going to be in a museum when they're talking about this crazy ass time period in American history. And this will be like part of the exhibit.
No. Before you get to that story, because I actually have a lot to say about that story.
All right.
Just a quick hit. So we talked about how a man got the police called on him because he was trying to cash a check. So in Oregon, black hotel guest had the police called on him because he was answering the phone in the lobby when his mama called. That is not a joke. That is not a punchline. That is real fact. The Atlanta Black Star was writing the story about Jeremiah Mazer. I don't know how to say his name. I'm really bad at it. It was his first time in Portland, Oregon. Oregon. Guys. Come on, guys.
Right.
Y'all legalize marijuana. I need y'all to chill out. This young man was there. This 34-year-old was there because Travis Scott was doing a concert Sunday night. And he went to a hotel. He answered a phone call in the lobby because his mama called him, and the staff called the police on him. Like, guys, can we stop? And I call this segment, white folks, get your cousins, okay?
Your cousins.
Get your cousins, okay? Weaponizing the police against black people can and will sometimes lead to the deaths of those black people. How about you have a conversation with them like they're actual human beings? You know what I'm saying? How about you not escalate and call the police on black people just because you feel uncomfortable? Can we not and say we did?
Yep.
I would in 2019. That's New Year resolution for all white people. We will not call the police on black folks just because we're scared. Mm-hmm. We are going to have conversations with people who do not look like us because there are other human beings in the world who do not have pale pigment. Okay,
mm-hmm.
Can we please? That should be on everyone's New Year's resolution.
Yeah. I did want to say, like, real quick bit of good news before our last headline, and then we'll have to go to the interview. But so Governor Snyder did one good thing. He pardoned our Dr. Lucas Nick. He was a Kalamazoo doctor from Bronson Hospital who got arrested by ICE agents in January of last year. Governor's Rick Snyder is commuted his sentence. So that's one good thing. Granted, he shouldn't have been arrested in the damn first place, but that is one thing.
Facts.
So okay, what I was talking about earlier, it's like this really just it sums up where America is at as a country at this particular time and moment. But an 8-year-old migrant boy from Guatemala died in Border Patrol custody on Christmas Eve. Yeah. We just had that story earlier this month about a little girl who died from a fever, lack of medical attention, while in custody of Border Patrol. And I mean, I can see you over there, Lawrence. You go ahead, take it.
No. I just also want to add before you go on. This is the third kid because if you remember the first operation that our troops did under President Trump, killed an 8-year-old girl, Lamar Alawaki's little sister, the 16-year-old kid that President Obama's administration killed. They killed his little sister. That is not a joke. That's not a punchline. Mm-hmm. That is real facts. That's true, and so outside of the kids' families being hit with tear gas at the border, kids being separated from parents at the Border Patrol, police cracking the heads of peaceful protesters. We also have kids dying.
Yeah.
We have children dying in our country because of our administration. Yeah.
All right. Well, there's not too much else to say about that. It's just it's dark. We'll probably be finding out more details about it in the coming days. But yeah, he had nausea, vomiting, ended up dying Christmas morning, and we know with the young woman, the young girl, who died earlier this month. It was some very obvious and outright neglect. Not too many details about this, but one could assume there was probably a similar modus operandi that led to this little boy's death. But yeah, man, it's dark stuff. And that, I mean, really, like, it speaks to where we're at as a country, man. Like, we are letting some evil stuff happen in our backyard.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
Our current president, to quote Jimmy Dore, puts an ugly face on already existing policies that were horrendous. I'm not gonna keep throwing but it's not that he's just putting an ugly face on it. He's escalating.
He's being more brutal.
Yeah, he's being much more brutal than our like the policies that we were already doing were already ugly to begin with. Mm-hmm. He's cranked it to 11.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's literally, like he said, he was gonna throw some spice on it. Like, and it's not a good thing. Like, it's not something that we should be celebrating. It's not something that we should be advocating for. These are horrible ideas from a horrible person, and we need to hold our president accountable, mm-hmm. and the people who are involved.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So,
but I do have to go.
All right. Well, Lawrence, thanks for coming on the show. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're actually going to be joined by President of SRA, Mr. Alex. He's going to be joining us. So, y'all, stay tuned. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. We are now joined by, and I'm sorry, which last name are you using right now, Alex?
I'm representing the organization, so it's Tackett today.
All right, Alex Tackett. All right, so Alex was gracious enough to take away some holiday time to talk to some of us Kalamazoo leftists out here. And again, big thank you for being on the program. He is the president of the Socialist Rifle Association. It's something that we've referenced a lot on the show before. And before we kind of dig into the subject matter and this interview is going to weave a little bit. We're going to be mostly talking about like kind of, big issues. This does actually stem out of kind of an article that we're going to talk about a little bit. But just for those at home who, maybe want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, Alex, who is the SRA and what is the SRA all about? Like kind of the elevator pitch there.
Yeah, so the SRA... we're a nonprofit education advocacy organization as it pertains to firearms and the working class right.
All right.
So as quick of a boilerplate as I can make it, we handle a lot of gun stuff, but we also do, other things that we see within our mission statement as both an organization dedicated to, self and community defense, in all manners that might include. I mean, we've looked at stuff before with disaster relief. We've done stuff with first aid, sustainable agriculture, these sort of things. We've got a big community building aspect, but it's right there in the name. We are a firearms organization. I think the pitch kind of started out as the leftist NRA, and we've really grown past that at this point and are, making our own thing. But if you got to sum it up to somebody in 5 words or less, that's probably about as good as you're going to get. That we're working to, provide education for folks who might be turned away by this very toxic gun culture we might have here in America. That there's a lot of concerning things for folks that maybe don't fit the traditional standard that we have in the country, that stereotypical image of a firearm owner here in America. So we're positioning ourselves out there to provide a friendly, more inclusive space for folks who just want to learn how to shoot and defend themselves and not be in a toxic and judgmental environment, as it were.
Well, one thing I did want to bring up, and I've been really impressed with what the SRA has been doing over the last year. Both in, like disaster relief and kind of organizing community self-defense. I was wondering if you could talk kind of briefly about. I think for a lot of listeners out there, and granted, we got a lot of like kind of lefty, socialist, communist, anarchists out there listening who kind of go beyond the conservative liberal definitions that always get shoved down our throats. But I think for the general population, the idea of like a leftist gun club seems I guess the word would be antithetical. So could you explain like in what is kind of the political centering of a organization that is also trains people in firearms and community self-defense from a leftist perspective versus say like say like a militia organization that maybe comes from a conservative or reactionary bent?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as political tendency goes, of course, we are very much a leftist organization. That's right there in the name. We're a big tent organization, though, in the fact that we've got everyone from social democrat, Bernie-crat types to full-on Marxist-Leninists to Maoists to anarchist communists to syndicalists to Possadists, I think, too. Pretty much everything, every tendency under the sun on the left, you've pretty much can find somebody here in the SRA that holds to it. I think what unites pretty much everyone, though, is this idea that, from maybe a right-wing militia standpoint, these guys, they aren't going out there trying to exercise their rights from a standpoint of, am I actually going to make people safer? They're coming at it from a very individualistic standpoint, that they think it's their inherent right because, they think therefore I am, and all very much a libertarian bent on these things. And we've definitely got different folks in the SRA have different ideas on, the place of community versus the individual. But I think as a rule, you can look at that and say a lot of these folks aren't coming at it from the perspective of, well, I should do this because it's my right, and I should be able to have a gun regardless, and this and that, and more so coming at it from the perspective of, if I can keep myself safe, then I keep my community safe. And I think it does come down to a bit more of that communal aspect as far as the SRA is concerned, and our members think about. I can't speak for anyone in particular, but I do feel like that there's definitely a greater tendency there to think of things as a group and as a community versus this very individualistic, this very machismo look at it, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I think we do lose a lot in the conversation. Is obviously we could talk about Americans are infamous for our historical amnesia. I think a lot of people do forget that, particularly like 1960s, there were a lot of militant leftist groups that were openly armed. Probably the biggest example that comes to mind were the Black Panthers, particularly open carrying around the steps of the California state legislature. And this is kind of going to slide into a little bit of this article and some of the issues around it. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to, part of that lost history, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that when leftist groups do get a little more militant and they're openly armed, they do face a degree of state scrutiny and state repression. And I was wondering, just as somebody who got involved with the SRA and, not necessarily as president, how do you think that kind of factors into this resurgence, in not just the SRA, but also like Redneck Revolt and, the UEP Newton gun clubs that have been sprouting up. What do you think, how does that play out in this resurgence, this kind of awareness that, historically there have been more militant firearm-based organizing on the left, but it's been kind of historically obscured and repressed?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple different ways we can take that question. I guess the way I'd approach it is to say, yeah, there's definitely been a resurgence in, terms of folks that are openly on the left and openly very vocal about the fact that they are armed and that they are practicing. And I think, there's definitely been notice. And it's funny you bring up the Black Panthers and, California. Of course, that ushered in the modern age of gun control back then in the 60s in California with their ban on open carry shortly afterwards by our own Ronald Reagan. But I think that there's definitely been I don't know how to phrase it, just even as the folks have become more open about this, there's definitely been an increased focus by the liberal media. Definitely these your stereotypical Democrats who want to institute even greater gun control measures. That was one of the things. We had a publication in the New York Times, an editor at the New York Times did an article on us, and she was very open with us about her intentions, that she felt by publicizing the fact that the SRA was around and that leftists were taking up arms, they would more or less push Republicans to favor gun control legislation. And we'll see if her take on that ends up being true or not. But I do think, kind of what this all is leading up to, of course, discussing a bit of this article is, so we've gotten the attention of New York Times editorialists. Surely we've gotten the attention of state actors as well. And that's definitely a concern, having state actors. I do feel like the SRA, and, this gets into the differences that we put ourselves out. There's already groups out there like Redneck Revolt and John Brown Gun Club and Huey P. Newton Gun Club and Red Dirt Defense, I think, and all these different leftist and left-leaning groups And so where does the SRA fit in that? And I feel like we do have one benefit that, you know, I definitely love and appreciate the guys over at Redneck Revolt and what they're up to. And, you know, I've heard that they've had some own issues in their organization, and I hope they get better from that. But the SRA kind of fills a niche, I feel like, that we haven't seen filled yet, and that is, you know, to be an education and advocacy organization. So, you know, I'm sure, you know, it's the old saying that if you've got 12 leftists in the room, at least 6 of them are FBI informants. And it's the sort of thing that I don't know how many federal agents are in the SRA, but I'm just glad that they're bankrolling the dues, because they got a whole heck of a lot coming for them, in the sense that, congratulations, you've signed up to the leftist NRA. Thanks for sending federal taxpayer money to do that. But I guess the point I'm getting there is that, you know, as an education and advocacy organization, you know, the SRA is very above ground. We've got legal documents, we've got legal statements. You know, you can look up the articles of incorporation. We've filed for our 501c4 tax exemption, all of these different things. We are very much steeped in the system, and that brings its own drawbacks, but also its own protection, that by using the mechanisms the system has put in place to protect itself, you know, there's not a whole heck of a lot that these folks can do, and we've always made sure that, you know, if anyone shows up as a member and starts talking about, hey, can you saw this shotgun off for me, that's how you get kicked out pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what that does brings up the general reason I ended up kind of getting your number in the first place. It's this situation made me think a lot about kind of how we as leftist organizers kind of deal with security culture and some of these kind of, we talk about like kind of government surveillance and such happening in real time. And for one, I did want to just get your statement on this. I'll explain to the listeners what the context is, but basically there were these text exchanges that got published by a website called Incendiary News about a chapter of a SRA, and we'll explain that in a second. From Central Texas, there was a member who, there was a lot of issues with him as an individual working as a prison guard, but also found out that this fellow was in open communication with the SRA. Now, as this situation unfolded, there were some concerns that like the old Facebook page might have been exposing people to some surveillance. I think we'll maybe talk a little more broadly later on about kind of what it is to be an armed leftist organization in our current post-Snowden surveillance state. But I did want to, get kind of your stance as an organization. I know you're not directly affiliated with this particular chapter, and just kind of get your official statement before we go into some of the issues that this brings up.
Absolutely. So, we put out a statement pretty immediately on Twitter. Our membership, of course, very quickly found this article, brought it to our attention. Really unfortunate timing. It was Christmas Day, and we were out with our families, but we were still able to get a statement out pretty fast. It was, of course, very concerning article that was released, and I can pretty much repeat the statement here that yes, that chapter is not affiliated with the SRA. That we have a list of verified chapters on our website at socialistra.org. And the Central Texas group that was doing this was part of a kind of, without getting too much into the details of, the backstory of the SRA and all of how it came about, it's been typed up and talked about many times in other places. Basically, in the beginning, there were disagreements, and some folks didn't come along to the legal structure and weren't entirely, on board with the idea of an education and advocacy organization. Some folks felt it like that they wanted to be their own redneck revolt in some ways. And so, some folks didn't come along. and wanted to do their own thing and continued to use the name. And we've talked on and off with them. And at the end of the day, we are not affiliated with them. We do not associate with them. And we are attempting to make sure that, our name is not in these sorts of articles again, because certainly that is very concerning for anyone who doesn't know that backstory. And I am very glad that Incendiary News, our secretary, was able to send them an email, and they were, kind enough to quickly update their article to explain the difference and to explain that, this group is not affiliated with the nonprofit Socialist Rifle Association. And they were very, very good about that. So I guess I can just state again, we've had trouble with them in the past, and we would really prefer they did not use the name, especially when these situations come up where it more or less forces our hand. But at very least, it does show, folks who were concerned about security culture and, inviting these sorts of people into their midst. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling on here, but I'm sure we can get into some questions about that. But just having that statement out there that, I'm very, very concerned about the article, and I'm very concerned that these people are continuing to besmirch the name, as it were.
Oh, yeah. And, I will say, for their part, this unaffiliated leftist gun control group in Central Texas goes under the name SRA. They actually did put out their own statement about it, and there's a lot of minutia around that, and I have it posted on my page, and I'll share it with the show page as well if anybody wants to dig into it. But I was kind of curious, talking kind of some of the deeper issues this brings up. When I first caught wind of this, my first reaction, kind of, my security culture instincts kicked in. I was like, it looks like they have somebody who's involved with this page was compromised, was talking to the FBI. And I thought you brought up something kind of interesting, a blaseness, I guess I'd say. There is this awareness, if you're a leftist organizer, I mentioned we live in this post-Snowden world where, we all have this hyper-awareness that, we are living very much in a surveillance state. We joke a lot of online jokes about, all of us having our own personal FBI agent that watches us. So, with that in mind, what is kind of being a leftist organization that is actively talking about firearms? I have tried to explain this to other people. There's a difference between being a right-winger, who is armed versus a left-winger that is armed, and how the state approaches those things differently. So I was wondering if you could talk about, one, having that awareness that, we are pretty much being watched all the time, and also kind of the different kind of risk assessment that comes in when you are a leftist organized gun, or especially a leftist person of color, such as somebody who would be involved in, a black gun club. But, just kind of that extra risk and those issues that come into play when you're a leftist versus a right-wing person organizing around this issue and this kind of education.
Yeah, and there's definitely a very, very clear difference. It's one of those things that, when I first got involved with the organization and I started, organizing here in Wichita, one of the first, before we had a bit more name recognition and people knew what we were about, when I started bringing it up in leftist circles, that was always the first question was, are you a militia? And of course, if you've got, if you're on the right and you're in a gun club and you go talk to somebody and you say, oh yeah, I'm in a gun club and I'm trying to, promote these rights, people just take it as face value. But if you come forward as explicitly leftist, then people, even on the left, then immediately assume, are you up to something else? Is there something more behind the scenes? And that is something that's something of a stigma to immediately overcome, and certainly folks who have been, disenfranchised throughout the years, people of color and many other individuals in the LGBT community and such, definitely have a greater barrier to entry on this and a greater risk of exercising their rights, as we've seen with the numerous police shootings of armed black men who were, defending themselves or defending others, and the police show up and shoot them dead on sight. And compare this to a white man who apparently beat two cops in the street and then ran off with their police cruiser, and he was apprehended unharmed, of course. So there's definitely a greater barrier to entry and a greater risk. At the same time, it's one of those things that I respect anyone who can look at this and say, well, it's too much of a risk for me. I don't want to take that risk onto myself. And that is every person's personal decision to decide if they want to do that. And that's why we really emphasize, if you're going to sign up, look at what your situation is and ask yourself if you want to, be involved as a member or be involved in the community and culture. And you have to look at that personally. At the same time, I do have, in my particular instance, I'm a bit more exposed than your usual member because, there's legal documents of my name out there. And I look at it from the perspective of somebody has to do it. That if there is never a leftist gun culture organized, there will never be such a culture. That by allowing state repression and by allowing society at large to say, no, you cannot be here, there are folks in the beginning who have to take those risks on. And again, that is a personal decision that you can't walk up to somebody and tell them you got to do this. But there are people out there willing to be, on the front lines of that, willing to get this established in the culture to the point that, the NRA is a almost state recognized body, and the fact that NRA certifications are required for concealed carry licenses in over a dozen states, and there is no alternative to an NRA certification in these states. Thinking about that and then saying, okay, where does it take to get the SRA to that point? When does the SRA start issuing concealed carry licenses and getting to that point of societal acceptance that, maybe not everyone's happy that we're around, but being so entrenched at that point that it becomes harder and harder for this ever-present state repression to take hold. And that's kind of been the thing of our thinking, that if you can get to that point before the state shuts you down and, take the measures necessary to keep that system going long enough, to go through the rigmarole of incorporation and these tax exemptions and all this paperwork to basically become legitimate and force the state to recognize you as legitimate. Because right now, the ACLU might not be the biggest fan of gun rights. They historically have varied on that position, but I can guarantee you right now, if the police come and bust down my door and arrest me, things are a little bit different than the 1960s, and I'm confident that we have, resources available that the people would be able to come to the organization's defense and say, no, this is out and out blatant discrimination and suppression. And I am confident that we could win many of these fights because we are above ground and we are acting as the state wants us to act. And, if you can get the state to give you an inch and you take a mile, then that works out for you.
That is a really great point to bring up. I think a lot of people do lose sight of the fact that surveillance does work both ways. And, the current, revolutionary black movements like Black Lives Matter, that comes to mind because, a lot of their organizing and kind of strength comes from the fact that we now have an ability to kind of, surveil the state back. So I'm sorry, it is about 7 o'clock. Would you have time for just a couple more questions, Alex? I know you're probably a pretty busy guy.
Oh, I've got plenty of time tonight.
Okay. All right. So, it's interesting that you brought up the NRA, and one of the things I think about in the context of like NRA versus SRA is being here in Michigan, and I'm not exactly sure what the culture is like there down there in Wichita, but in Michigan, it's very interesting. We've got a lot of very kind of libertarian conservative types, especially thinking of like the folks in our population who either, are NRA members or they join like, the Michigan militia. And in particular, I think there's a lot of people out there, I have conversations with all the time who otherwise would have very progressive politics if it weren't for the gun issue. Yeah, my own dad, he's kind of a single issue voter. He's agrees, like if you kind of break down what socialism is, brick by brick, with a lot of these policies, but again, like electorally speaking, he kind of identifies as a conservative because it's like, I gotta vote for the right wing party because they're gonna take away my guns. So, for that part, like, do you find that, like, strategically, do you think, like, is there, like, an NRA, SRA pipeline? Do you guys look at being able to kind of draw folks like that in, or do you just kind of start from the point of, we're just going to focus on bringing in, people on the left who own guns. But I was just kind of curious about your perspective and maybe, like, kind of your organizational strategy thinking about that.
Absolutely, and this is one of the big things we're looking at doing going into 2019. That 2018 has been a real bootstrap of a year to, get enough members and get enough funds available to do what we want to do and what we need to do. And part of that is, the culture on the left and the population on the left right now is simply not where it needs to be in America. That, the biggest leftist organization in America right now is the DSA, and they only just recently hit 60,000 members. And so 60,000 members out of over 300 million people in America, that's a pretty small ratio compared to, how many members of the Republican and Democratic parties are there, or even how many members of the Green Party are there in comparison. And that's kind of the thing that we've been looking at is, of course, we want to continue to draw groups on the left and leftists who, maybe haven't really thought about guns before or have even been against guns in the past but have come around on the issue more recently. But we want to continue to draw on those groups and continue to build leftist unity in America. But at the same time, just as the Socialist Party in the past, in the early 1900s, drew in many apolitical workers who prior had not really considered themselves leftists or political at all, and drew them in and inspired them and got them to start organizing and start a real movement in America for as long as it lasted before Woodrow Wilson put the kibosh on that. I do think that the SRA's survival going into the future will necessarily, be reaching out to these people and saying, look, we have views that you can agree with. And, part of that is being education oriented, that we have firearms education, but also on our website we have leftist ideology primers. We have stuff, I think, on Marxist-Leninism, syndicalism, and libertarian communism, I think, is what we've got up on the website right now. These little primers on these different ideologies on the left, and being able to approach somebody, and say, look, we're not whatever you may think of this. There's a lot of us, and we have very different opinions, but we come together on these core issues. And I found, especially organizing in Kansas, almost 9 times out of 10, I'd say, if I can approach somebody and start to have a conversation with them about, the actual tenets of leftist and socialist thought of, hey, why do you work under a boss all day that you didn't choose and you didn't elect, but you would never live under a dictator? But here you go, 8 hours of your day every 5 days a week, and you're putting yourself under a dictator. Why are you doing that? And approaching them, with almost socialism with American characteristics, as it were, that having the correct terminology and then going ahead and saying, yes, and guess what? We know it's not like the NRA says, it's not like they put out on TV and the ads and these newsletters and whatever that, all these commies are coming to grab your guns and, vote Republican, even as Trump, confiscates people's bump stocks without compensation or anything, just executive order from the president declaring a object in your possession illegal and that you must get rid of it within 90 days or face federal prosecution. Approaching it from that standpoint, and yes, drawing in these people who would be what the pundits would consider independent voters, and even people sometimes, as odd as it may be, in the Republican Party, who, like you said, are one issue voters, but would otherwise be, either center left or just straight up leftist. I kind of wanted to follow that up by asking, and this is kind of more of a basic theoretical question, but I think it's important just to get the full context for those out there listening. So what is kind of the leftist argument for having a making sure that working class people have access to arms? I think a lot of it gets conflated in our very binary way of political thinking here in the United States. But what is the leftist argument for that? Just kind of so people have kind of a theoretical understanding of those on the left who argue for gun rights. And so this comes under a few different things because different tendencies have different justifications for this. So, myself, I consider myself a federal syndicalist. So I don't consider myself quite all the way to an anarcho-syndicalist. I do think that the state has to exist in some fashion, but I am not very trustful of the state. And I, from my own personal political leanings, see it as if the state has control over your guns, well, the state is already going to have control over a military because no state can exist without an enforcing arm to defend itself and attack others to entrench itself. And, the state also has not only the military but police forces at its disposal. And so you are, in essence, from that perspective at least, if you give up your arms, then you are saying, I trust the state to protect me. And I feel like this even goes to, other leftist tendencies that do support a strong state. So even Marxist-Leninist tendencies have a similar feeling on that in the sense that looking at it from the sense of the class character of the state. So, existing in a capitalist state, why do we entrust a capitalist state which, defends capitalism because by its very nature it is run by capitalists for capitalists? Why do we then entrust that to protect the workers when the workers themselves should be able to protect themselves and should know what is best for themselves? And then, you can get into different arguments from that tendency then of saying, well, what do gun rights look like under a socialist state when the class characteristics change? And even then, you've got a lot of different Marxist-Leninists who will debate about that as well, as far as, well, is it the job of the workers to ensure that the state always maintains itself as socialist? You can see this even in Cuba, that Cuba is redoing their constitution, and one of the things they put in their new constitution is that the Cuban people have the right to violently oppose their government to ensure that the government maintains its socialist path. And it's really shocking to me that a nation would put in its governing document the right of the people to violently oppose it. That's certainly, I'm not aware of that being anywhere else. But so there's a few different theoretical bases you can go off of depending on your ideology. But I do think that no matter what ideology you hold, it does come back to the idea of why trust the state to protect you when the state has shown time and time again that it is interested in protecting the people who run it, the elite, the wealthy, the folks who can make decisions happen, almost contravening the will of the people that are supposed to be ultimately in charge and responsible of the state. Because, I mean, the Supreme Court has ruled time and time again here in the United States. I don't know if it went to the Supreme Court. I think it was just a federal court, but it's gone to the Supreme Court before a man in New York City who stopped the subway knife attacker, and then the police stood by and did nothing while the guy was getting stabbed. And then it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, the police don't have an obligation to protect you. And they've said the same exact thing with the Parkland shootings, that even as the Democrats, these Democratic leaders, go out and say we have to institute gun control to stop school shootings, we now have a court ruling saying the Parkland police had no obligation to go and protect those school children. They could have stood outside all day long, and they would have been within their obligations. And it is truly stunning and shocking to me for then people to turn around and say, well, we have to trust the state then. We have to trust the state and its enforcers to protect us. And why do you need a gun to protect yourself? And I do feel like that is core to any leftist outtake on this. It's not that you have some inherent individualistic libertarian right to possess a 50 caliber howitzer or something. It's that you have an inherent right to protect yourself, and you cannot rely on others sometimes to protect yourself. And those who can protect others then have an obligation to protect their community.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, you brought up the Parkland shootings, and this is something we talk about mass shootings on the show a lot. And kind of the way our show breaks down is like we have different tendencies hosting. I'm more of like an anarcho, communist, socialist, what have you. My co-host is more of like a social democratic socialist, and this is something that we kind of come to a schism on a lot. I am more libertarian when it comes to gun control. He kind of advances for kind of more strict gun control policies to help curtail some of these shootings. And I was curious about like how the SRA approaches this question. This is an issue that obviously comes up time and time again. I personally think neither mainstream political tendency in American discourse really gets to the root of the issue, but I do also appreciate that I know the SRA certainly talks about it in a different way than I've seen the NRA do, which is just craven, awful stuff where they just go after the victims of these shootings. But I was kind of curious if you could tell the people at home, like, kind of what is the SRA's approach to the question of mass shootings, and what the roots of the problem are and like the solutions.
And see, this is one of those things. Of course, mass shootings are a very, very sticky subject and very tragic. I definitely I wish that we did not live in a world where folks go out and kill dozens at a time. That is not a world I want to live in, and that's a world I want to work towards, where we do not have to be concerned about this. And the way the SRA looks at this is basically what are you doing to solve the problem? That the mass shootings are a symptom. So what is the disease? If this is the symptom of a society that is sick, then what disease has this society been afflicted with? That this is not, a mass shooting is not itself the problem, but the outgrowth of a problem. And this is something that I feel like, yes, the Republicans and Democrats fail time and time again. The NRA, the NRA has no interest in addressing core societal issues. The NRA only has an interest in promoting its gun manufacturing benefactors. And so they take, yes, a very, very awful approach to this, going after these victims. But as far as the SRA's approach to this, it is, okay, we have this problem. How do we solve this problem? What is going on here? And I think there's many, many, many different factors that are going on here. There is a mental health system in America that is broken, that people cannot get the help they need, and oftentimes are scared to get the help they need, because if they do, turn themselves in, as it were, and go to seek medical therapy for whatever affliction is ailing them, sometimes that can backfire on them and have them stripped of their rights, have their personal autonomy restrained, which makes people not want to do that, which makes people, drive themselves deeper. And of course, that is then, not the end of the problem, is because, a lot of Democrats will then say, oh, this, of course, is a mental illness problem. Well, not actually helping the mental illness problem. They'll acknowledge it, but they won't actually do anything about it because that costs too much money or something. But that it can't be where we stop, because no, not every mass shooter is afflicted with a mental illness, nor is mass shooting an end result of mental illness. So most, I'd say, I'll go ahead and state on the record, probably the vast, 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 vast majority of mentally ill people do not do any sort of action that we would consider reprehensible.
Oh, yeah.
It is extremely an outlier. Those are extreme outliers in this situation, but nonetheless, we still must look at it and get people the help they need. As far as others, we can look at, things not motivated by any affliction somebody might have, but motivated by sheer hatred. That we have, the shooting within a black church, motivated by pure racial hatred. And somebody who had displayed these intentions time and time and time again, and nobody had gone and stopped him or thought to stop him. And why does this person get to that point? Because I don't think anyone is born hating another. Why did he get to that point where he was so hateful to just a group of people that he would go out and shoot others in a place of worship? And I do feel like that is a societal problem. That is something society must own up to, is this fact that society allows and society breeds these individuals and does not early enough and often enough tell people that, no, this is a terrible thing what you're doing and thinking. You can't think like that. And it's just not good. We almost have a culture where it's impolite to tell somebody that they're racist, and it can't be like that, because it allows these people to dig themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into their own hatred, and it erupts in these very, very violent ways.
Oh yeah, and oh man, I could go on to that topic for a while. A lot of white people, I know, you say you infer something as racist, they'll start screeching like a velociraptor. But I think I want to kind of two things, and then we can probably close out the interview. And again, I really want to thank you for taking the time over the holiday to come join us.
Absolutely.
On the Hoodrat program here. So, I think, kind of obvious thing that the SRA is kind of incorporated itself and developed out of environment where two very concrete historical developments here in the States. One, whatever you think of, Mr. Bernard Sanders, he did really bring socialism back into the national lexicon in 2016. But also in 2016, you saw the ascendance of, I would call the Trump administration, not necessarily fascist, but maybe proto-fascist, or even maybe like kind of anarcho-fascist. I think it all reminds me a lot of when Biff got power in the Back to the Future film, like that kind of. Sorry, I'm going down a tangent here. I guess what I wanted to ask about is the relationship between kind of the resurgence of groups like the SRA and the insurgency of global fascism. You know, it seems like people are more drawn to groups like the SRA because the idea of community self-defense has a very tangible and concrete meaning when you're looking at a world where politicians like Trump and Bolsonaro and Viktor Orban are getting into power and threatening the direct safety of a lot of marginalized communities.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't really ask members when they join what the reason they joined was. Well, we put out a survey in November, with some general demographics questions, and we did give the opportunity if people wanted to tell us why they joined the SRA, and everyone's got their own reason, but it was definitely there's plenty of people within the SRA that do not feel comfortable anymore with the world that we live in now, and this is something that's turned people's minds. That even some liberal Democrats are now thinking, man, why would I want to turn over my guns to this fellow up in the White House that seems to be reminiscing about certain very, very fascist individuals. I mean, you can't get much more obvious than having Mein Kampf on your nightstand, and I mean, there's some stuff there, and people are definitely rethinking about the issue and thinking, man, why would I turn up my ability to defend myself? Because unfortunately, it's not even the state we have to worry about right now. That at least America has some sort of institutionalized protections. They're as weak as they can be sometimes. There is at least a facade that people have to go through, whereas we have folks like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, who are literally running programs as we speak with this direct intention of training people to hunt down and kill leftists. These folks are very, very brazen about their intentions. And these are private individuals, private militias that have pledged themselves to any governmental figure that they view as valid, which means anyone that they agree with. And they certainly, the Southern Poverty Law Center, I don't really agree with everything they put out because they are very much a liberal institution, but they have put out a good report on a fella who is very much a very authoritarian, fascist sort of individual who is going out in public and encouraging lone wolf attacks against people that he considers, his enemies. So leftists, liberals, people of color, anyone who does not support his ethno-state. And it's a very, very concerning situation. And I think a lot of people do see that and say, yes, I do need to protect myself because I don't even have to worry about the state yet because we've got all these folks running around directly saying they want to kill me.
Yep, no, that's very true. Maybe that's where we're looking at privatized fascism. I wanted to kind of close out by asking kind of some general questions about what the SRA has been up to and future plans. I know y'all did a lot of disaster relief work, but a lot of what you guys seem to do is like combining the theory with some practice. Kind of like what has the SRA really focused on since it incorporated, and maybe like some plans you got for the future that you would be okay talking about here on the radio?
Yeah, so what we've done so far, our biggest things to date as far as, money spent anyways, is probably the 2 disaster relief efforts that we conducted for Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael. Those were very successful. Hurricane Michael especially, we were able to collaborate with the DSA and the PSL and Mutual Aid Defense Relief, I believe. and that was a very good successful thing. In the meantime, we've kind of used that money to go through all the hoops of getting an organization set up, getting these incorporations done. There's a whole lot that goes into it, not just filing with the Secretary of State to become a corporation or nonprofit. And you got to pay the IRS, you got to get attorneys, you got to get insurance, all these myriad of things. But thankfully, we've kind of reached the end of that, and we're almost done with our bootstrap stage. We've been working on continuing to offer our members more and more services. We've started taking applications about a month and a half ago for instructor programs. So I mentioned earlier in the show about, hey, what does it take to get the SRA to start issuing concealed carry licenses? How does that work? And we are very glad that we were able to work with the USCCA to get their program for folks. So we are accepting applications for instructors that if you're a member and you want to become an instructor, we are offering full sponsorships for the training through the USCCA to obtain their certification, at which point it does vary very much by state to state. Every state's got its own rules, but that's the first step as far as getting us to the point where states do recognize our certifications. Right now, we'll be able to use the USCCA certification to issue or to at least train people for concealed carry. I believe in 26 states is how many states recognize the USCCA certification. So folks that are in those states can receive training from the USCCA through the SRA. We'll make sure that gets paid. We'll handle as far as setting up classes and getting folks signed up and everything, and it'll be a very close relationship with any instructors we bring on board. So that's the biggest thing right now. We've been taking in a lot of applications, and we're starting to, now that the holidays are winding down, start going through those and getting people started in the process for 2019 so we can have that available. As well as other training programs. We've looked at working with the Red Cross to do first aid training as well, and any training programs that we can conceivably do that are within our mission scope and that we can offer to members at as low of a price as we can do and break even, basically, if not even subsidize it a little bit more.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say the final thing that we're looking at doing is, we've been focusing a lot in education this year of getting those educational materials out, getting theory education, getting gun safety out. We are going to be doing gun lock clinics, like the DSA's brake light clinics. So we'll be doing gun lock clinics that we'll be handing out California compliant cable locks to folks with some literature on gun safety and how to properly maintain and store your firearm. And then the biggest thing is 2019, I would really like that to be a year of advocacy for us, that we've had a lot of statements out online, but really starting in 2019, we can start taking to heart this notion of being an advocate for the working class and the working class right to self-defense, going to state legislatures, talking to politicians, convincing them of, one, why they should listen to us, and two, why they should do what we want.
All right. Great. And so I think we're going to wind down the show. Thanks for kind of sticking around for some extra innings with us, Alex. And I did just want to say, I know how stressful and time-consuming it can be to help maintain a national organization like this. So, hats off to you for kind of stepping up, and the rest of y'all who are kind of organizing the chapters and such. I did want to ask, sorry, one other thing. If y'all are interested in hearing more from Alex and the SRA, they have a podcast. You can find it on Google Play. I know you just did your last episode, but there's some really interesting episodes back there. I think my favorite was probably the cyberpunk one. We talk a lot about dark futures on our show too. So, and just one last thing: people want to get involved in the SRA, they want to join. How would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so we got a website at socialistra.org. You can find this website there, read about a little what we're doing, read some articles. If you want to sign up, we've got the membership form there. It's got, the bylaws and terms and conditions and all that good stuff that you can read through before tossing your dues money at it. We do only charge annual dues at this time. It is not monthly. There is an optional sustainer membership for folks who want to contribute more, but that gains no extra rights or privileges. Everyone is in equal standing, and it's $25 a year for annual dues. And more than that, if you want to kind of just follow us and see what we're up to before, maybe jumping in, or if you just are interested in what's going on, we do exist at Twitter, at Socialist RA over there on Twitter as well. Our chapters always doing new things, and I'm sure we've got over, I think, almost 50 chapters now. We've got members in all 50 states, but not quite chapters in every state yet. But it seems like new chapters spring up every day now. So I'm sure there's something in your local area. We are a nonprofit organization, and if you don't necessarily want to be a member, but you want to check it out, maybe you want to attend a class or something, definitely try sending a message either to the national organization asking if anything's happening in your area, or if you can find them, your chapter nearby, and see if anything's going on. If you just want to observe and see what's going on, or take a class or something. Each chapter has its own different rules on exactly how they deal with members of the public, and because security culture, even though it's relatively simple to get in at the national level, each chapter is given the right to vet its own members a little bit further and make sure that nothing silly is going on. But nonetheless, every chapter is very much willing to talk to members of the public, even if you got to maybe go to the coffee shop first and talk to the organizer. So there's definitely a lot going on, and you can find chapter contacts at the website as well. At the national website, we have pages for all the chapters that we've recognized.
All right, Alex. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and let you go. Enjoy your rest of your holiday time before New Year starts. Want to thank y'all for tuning in to the show again. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. We always post our episodes up onto YouTube after the fact, so we'll probably have that available for y'all tonight. Until next time, thank you for tuning in, and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Alex.